Okay, good morning. Can you all hear me out there? Can you hear me fine? Okay. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the House Revenue Committee. And our cell phone time now says exactly 7:30. So our Zoom time, our camera time says 7:33. So I wanted to make sure we're on. Everybody's on cell phone time. So 7:30, we're starting right on time. I want to welcome all the visitors to today's meeting. Some new faces here that we see many regulars, but we see some new faces, and welcome. We appreciate you being here this morning. As we work through this, I'll just, the rules of these committees, if you're new here for the first time, is that when we take public testimony, all the testimony comes through the committee chairman. There's no back and forth between your testimony and maybe a member of the committee or between committee members themselves. So all conversation. So in that way, it's not personal. And then we get to hear all voices, right? Everybody gets to be heard. And so if you're in the audience and maybe somebody's testifying and you don't agree with them, you're not going to boo or hiss or make a noise, or if you agree with them, you're not going to clap and say, yeah, that a boy. We just don't do that in these meetings. So everybody's really respectful in how we do that. And so, and again, some of that seems awkward, but this formality is really important for this process to keep moving forward. So again, appreciate everybody being here and welcome, and we're glad and we want to hear from you. Now, just a couple announcements. We had last year, you might recall, we passed a proposed constitutional amendment, and that is to separate residential out of the all other category. Well, this year, the Joint Revenue Committee brought an amendment to that amendment. That amendment's still going forward, but we tried to amend that amendment then to allow an adjustment to full valuation by the legislature in order to put a cap on and be constitutional with that part. That was a committee bill, and as you folks who are here a lot understand the rules of a budget session that were instituted in the mid-70s, back when we were rated the worst legislative body in America, but it requires the 2/3 vote to even hear a bill, not to debate it or talk about it or vote it up and down. It requires a 2/3 vote, and that was back when folks were handwriting. We didn't have any staff, handwriting amendments and so on. And so that archaic deal, which most states don't have, only like 2 states require supermajorities, is still with us. So that committee bill died. And so House Bill 18, which was reliant on that change in the Constitution to provide a cap to our residents on valuations, we will not hear that bill. And even though it's been noticed, there's no sense moving forward with that. And so I appreciate everybody coming early. And as we want to hear everybody as we move forward, we'll carry this meeting on to noon. We'll carry it on to adjournment. We'll meet tomorrow. We're going to keep meeting to get the work done. So we appreciate it. Okay. With that said, roll call. I guess I got to call roll. That's the first deal. And then we're going to get this thing going. So can you, Miss Jeffrey, are you calling the roll? Please call the roll. Thank you.
Good morning. Representative Baer.
Here.
Representative Byron.
Here.
Representative Locke.
Present.
Representative Northrup.
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Storer.
Here.
Representative Strock.
Here.
Representative Zwanitzer.
Here.
Chairman Harshman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The first bill for our consideration, the first bill up is House Bill 45. So the sponsor of the bill's here, Representative Berry. If you can come on up, and any co-sponsors who want to join him, that's fine too. You're welcome to come up and sit. We have 4 seats up here. Good morning. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Barry Crago, House District 40. I'm happy to bring to you today House Bill 45. House Bill 45 is a simple and straightforward solution to the skyrocketing tax increases Wyoming is currently experiencing statewide. Simply stated and described, actually, it's a tax cap structured as an exemption. Under this bill, the maximum amount your residential taxes can go up in any year is 5%. If passed, folks won't have to worry about continued double-digit increases in their taxes each year. People of my county and many others that have seen an influx of folks moving in are struggling with their taxes. And this bill would allow them to actually budget from year to year, like we have in the past, prior to 2020. No more surprise tax bills. The unique thing about the bill is that we don't have to amend the Constitution, unlike most of the other cap increases, as you were just talking about, Mr. Chairman. The other tax cap bills out there, except for one other one I think you're going to hear today, require an amendment of the Constitution. This one does not. Article 15, Section 12 of the Wyoming Constitution provides that the legislature can provide property tax exemptions. The other main benefit of this bill, as opposed to some of the others, is that it can be implemented by our Department of Revenue as well as our local county assessors without major changes to our tax system, the software system. So essentially no expense to make it happen, and it can happen in a timely manner. And to that end, it can actually happen in 2024 because it does not require, as structured, anyone to apply for the exemption. We can do it administratively through the department and through our local assessors. And I'm sure they will be happy to provide more detail on that, how that can actually happen and how that actually works. But I have discussed this with some of them, including my local assessor quite a bit, and the department to make sure that that could actually happen, that if we can get this bill out of the legislature in a timely manner and signed by the governor, that it can be implemented for 2024 and we can give people relief this year versus next year, which a lot of our other tax ideas and tax bills apply to next year versus 2024. One of the questions, and I'm sure y'all will hear about this, one of the questions I've heard is why doesn't it include land? And the answer to that is, in talking with our department and with our assessors, that makes it much more complicated to administer. And there's fear, and they will explain this, I'm sure, in more detail, that if we include land in 2024, it won't be, in this particular bill, we would not be able to implement it in 2024. And that's why it's not in the bill draft. I'd originally wanted to include land as well as the residential structure, but because of trying to get it done for 2024 versus subsequent years, I did not include that because it's my understanding and in talking with the people who actually have to implement these laws that we pass, that if we do that, it would complicate it to the point where we would not be able to do it administratively, or at least not get it done in time because of the rollover date. And the exemptions have to be in, for example, veterans exemptions, your requests for those have to be in by I think it's the 4th Monday in May, because the June 1, I believe, is the deadline to have those exemptions in. The county assessors need to know it by then, and this would that would complicate it to the point where we can not do that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's sort of a quick rundown of the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Representative, can you just take us page by page and just walk us through the bill and go through it? Thank you. And then we'll take some testimony. And then members, if you have questions as we're going, I appreciate your questions as we work. Okay, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. So I'm gonna skip over the title and the long title and just skip to the meat of the bill, which is on page 2. We're going into Title 39, Chapter 11, Section 105, where we describe exemptions. And we're exempting a portion of a single-family residential structure. And then it goes on down to explain exactly what the exemption is, which is the amount of the exemption, and I'll explain it in a second after I read it. The amount of the exemption under this paragraph shall be any assessed value of the single-family residential structure that is in excess of the prior year assessed value plus 5%.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Barrett, you got a question right there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Crago, for being here and presenting this bill. I think it's a novel idea, and I really appreciate your bringing it. You've really opened our eyes up to a lot of possibilities, and I'm gonna have several questions, but in this section in particular, I have concern on line 18. And this has to do with how we apply the exemption. We're applying it to the prior year assessed value, which in year one, I believe it's perfectly set. But my concern is the following year, year two and beyond. And the reason, I'll just give you an example. If I have a $100,000 home, year two, or in this year, it gets assessed at $150,000. This bill will mean that I'm only paying tax on $105,000. But then in year two, if we look back at the assessed value, the problem is, how do we define that assessed value? In my mind, that assessed value from the previous year was $150,000 versus $105,000. So it's just a language thing there that I'm concerned about how that is interpreted. How would you
Okay,
address
very
that?
good. Representative Grego.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bear. So when you go dig into the statutes a little bit, you're mixing market value versus assessed value. And right at the beginning, and I don't have my statute book or I could tell you the exact page, but assessed value equals taxable value. I'm not opposed if you want to make sure that it's very clear in there that that's what we're talking about, but to keep the language the same as what other terminology within the statute, that's why we use that word. But the intent, obviously, and you and I have chatted about it a little bit, the intent is obviously to keep it, so the second year, 105 is your base, it can only go up to whatever the math is exactly on that, 105 plus 5%. If we need to clarify that, I have no problems including that kind of an amendment in here, because that's obviously the intent, that's what we want to do. But in talking, both with the assessors and the department, they understand this language to mean exactly that, but I have no problems making it better and more clear. That's what we're here for.
So, and I think that's a very good question. I've heard a lot of comment on that. And so the key word on line 16, assessed value, not market value. That's what, we've got a statute book there. If you want to reference any more to us, we can take notes on that.
I gave you Title 39 if that's.
Okay, you got Title 39 right there. We'll pause a minute. Very good question. And I've heard that before as well, so get that answered. Go ahead. I think your mic's, yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on 3911-101A, and it's actually the first definition in the statutes, assessed value means taxable value. Again, if we want to make it very clear exactly what we're talking about, let's do that. I have no problem with that type of an amendment.
Okay, maybe the assessors and others might. Okay, very good. Okay, continue, please.
So as we were talking, it talks about the 5% there on line 18, so that's the maximum amount it could go up. Then it goes on to provide that the exemption does not apply under two circumstances. One, if there's structural changes to the single-family residential structure, including new construction or additions to an existing structure. So in other words, if you double the size of your house, the exemption does not apply. You would have a new base for that, and I think the department and the assessors can address exactly how that would work.
Okay,
But,
go ahead. You have a question? Go
yes,
ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you. But the increase in value, the exemption doesn't apply just to the increase in value, correct, of the new construction? If you look at line 1. So I'm just saying, it's not like if you build something new, then you don't get, you get any benefit and you're at full. It's just the increase in the value attributable to the new construction.
Correct.
So I think let's make this clear for everybody. So you have a $100,000 home, like we talked about, and you add a $50,000 addition to it. I think is that what you're asking?
Yes.
So let's hear, so it resets then to 150?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, the exemption would not apply at that point. If you go make wholesale changes, this doesn't include, in my understanding and trying to get this language kind of fairly tight so the department could administer it. If you're going in and making minor changes within your house, it's not a big
Right.
deal. if you go make wholesale structural changes to your house, the exemption no longer applies, and you're gonna reset at whatever the new value is based on the addition.
So it'd be like tearing down your house, building a new house.
Correct.
Yeah, same.
Yes.
Okay, were there other questions on this? Anybody on? Go ahead, Representative Bear.
I just wanted to make a comment and clarification. If we go back to page 2, line 21, it explains, and this maybe will help the good vice chair. It says the property shall be valued at full value if.
Thank you, Representative Bear.
Yeah,
So then the second
go ahead.
the second situation where the exemption would not apply is if the property was purchased or changed ownership in the prior year. So you cannot pass your exemption on to somebody else. If it sells, it resets at whatever value it would have been. I mean, and that's common in most of these types of bills that we've been talking about over
Okay,
the last year.
question by Representative Swanson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And so there's some protections then for like a surviving spouse, if their name is not on the deed. I would imagine if someone passes and their kids inherit that property, then it resets, from what I understand. Make sure that's correct. But in the case where you have to be co-owners of that residence and one of you passes and the property is transferred, that exemption stays on?
Go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Zwanitzer. So the answer to that is not in the bill, but that is something that would require rulemaking, and several of these terms would require rulemaking, just to be upfront about that.
Or an amendment if we want to.
Or an amendment if
Yeah,
you decide to
sure.
do that, but as structured, I was trying to keep this as simple as possible so that it's easily understandable by the public, so they know what we're trying to do. If I kick out a 20-page bill with all these different amendments and what qualifies, I think that gets difficult. I wanted to keep it simple. In talking with the department, they can do rules, they can set up rules quickly. And so that's what I'm trying to do. In talking to them, yes, there would be protections for them. I mean, if it's in one spouse's name and not the other, the exemption's still going to apply. If it's changing ownership to other family member, kids, or if it's changing to they're selling it, whatever. There's multiple situations where change in ownership would come into play.
Okay, I think we're on paragraph C, line 9, page 3.
Where that's exactly where it says the department will adopt and promulgate rules to implement this particular law. And then down in the bottom, and this is one where we've had a lot of questions too, and it talks about what is a single family residential structure. That says it's structure intended for human habitation, including a house, mobile home, modular home, mobile home, townhouse, or condominium that is a privately owned single-family dwelling unit. And I think this is a good question for the director and how they would define that. I've had questions about duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, and that'd be a good question for her, exactly how to define that so it encompasses everything that we want it to encompass. And again, if you want to put that in as an amendment, feel free, that we can dang sure do that, or we can do a lot of that stuff through rules so that we can get it administered quickly.
Okay,
And then the rest of the bill on pages 3 and 4 just provides so that the public knows what the amount of, what their tax savings will be, that the result of if this bill were to pass and there is an exemption provided for them, they would be put on their notice of assessment, so they know how that would work.
your taxes would be 2,000, but with this exemption, it's 1,600 or whatever. Okay, very good. Okay, members, any other questions of the sponsor before we start taking testimony? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is something that we've had testimony from the good chairman of the State Board of Equalization on. You and I have discussed it, Representative, about creating an exemption with the purpose of making a cap. We're talking about the difference of Article 15, Section 12, and Section 11. We're using Section 12 to get around Section 11. As an attorney, do you have concerns with the courts looking at that as a potential for a reason to overturn this law?
Mr. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bear, I think the courts ultimately may get to make that decision, but what I would say is any of these exemptions that we're talking about are gonna have the same problem. We're using that very language within that provision in the Constitution. So if this one's unconstitutional, then all of them are gonna be unconstitutional. And ultimately, that's not our decision to make. The courts will get to make that. Possibly, maybe not. They're only gonna get to make the decision if somebody challenges these laws we're trying to pass.
And then we'll wish we would have passed that constitutional amendment a couple days ago, but that's another. Okay, Representative Bear has a follow-up.
Thank you, and I do appreciate, going into a new area and finding out. I think we should be challenging these laws and maybe even interpretation of the Constitution, just to find out where the edge of the envelope is, if you will. The follow-up question to that is simply, the exclusion of a portion of the other category, which is really where we get into a constitutional question of equality and fairness, which is part of that Section 11. You have chosen to exclude commercial. We already pretty much exclude ag because it's calculated very differently, and I understand that. But when you chose to exclude commercial, are you concerned that that's going to invite that lawsuit that you just mentioned?
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Representative Bear, I don't think so, because in my opinion, if we have the ability to do any sort of exemption, then we can narrow it down to whatever exemption we want it to be. And so either we have that ability under the Constitution or we don't, and we'll probably find that out. And so that does not bother me, splitting residential off and us trying to help where the major problem is. That does not cause me any concern, other than the overall concern about, hey, how do those two interplay?
Okay, very good. Any other questions for the sponsor, members? Any other questions? Okay, so we're gonna open this up to members of the, executive branch, elected officials, to give any other insight on this bill, and then we're gonna take public comment. Don't go far when we work the bill. We're gonna work this bill, and then we're gonna lay it back like we're doing all these bills. We're gonna lay them back, and then, as the will of the committee to lay it back, and then we're gonna kind of decide what's gonna work together and bring these forward in a package of relief and reform for our people. Okay, so thank you. And anybody, director? And maybe there's some assessors here. If you guys want to come up and fill these seats, that'd be great. And you know the rules of the road. Please introduce yourself so folks in the audience and folks watching know who you are and who you're representing. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. I'm pleased to be able to answer some questions that you may have related to this bill and the functionality, particularly, of the computer-assisted mass appraisal system that, by statute, you've put that responsibility on the Department of Revenue to provide that system to all 23 county assessors. We, within our budgets that you pay for, we pay for their hardware, their software. We also are required to promulgate rules to administer all tax law. And so specific to this bill, we have the functionality within the CAMA system. Just so you know, we have a system based on abstract codes. The State Board of Equalization identifies abstract codes, and that's their responsibility to say, single-family residential, multifamily residential, commercial, industrial. They identify those abstract codes. In the CAMA system, for every building, an abstract code is assigned based on what it is, whether it's single-family residential, if it's a single-family residential site built, if it's a single-family residential manufactured home, single-family residential on an agricultural property. We're able to query that type of detailed information within our system. Why is that important? That's why we're able to use technology to identify single-family residential structures, then make a calculation on that single-family residential structure and have the CAMA system say, what's your assessed value this year? What was the assessed value last year on that structure? What's the difference? And what exceeds 5% from last year's value? And then we can automate loading that exemption of that assessed value in the CAMA system. And it does not take someone manually going out to every account that's identified on some report. We can actually automate that process. That becomes very important if you wish to impose any type of change in statutory administration of property tax quickly for 2024. As mentioned previously, assessors by statute are required to have assessment schedules to property owners no later than the fourth Monday in May. There isn't as soon thereafter as possible, but truly, there's an entire tax calendar that follows that with the taxpayer's right to appeal, the ability to have that visit with the assessor and the taxpayer. So it's important that assessors stick to that fourth Monday in April to get that process going. So that being said, the other part of that
Hey,
is,
we have,
Yes.
just before you move on, I
Okay.
think we have a question on that part. Go ahead, Representative Hope.
Talking about the single-family residential structure already being in your system, I just wanted to ask you then, are we limiting you by defining it in here if it's something that you already have?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, we can identify a single-family residential structure as opposed to a multifamily residential structure. So within our CAMA system, if it's a two-family or three-family, four-family, now, under the State Board of Equalization's abstract, up to a four-family is considered residential. So if you look at assessed values across the state, that's considered residential. This bill specifically applies to single-family residential. And so we're able to query those codes and only apply it using technology to single-family residential. If it were, we'll see other bills that go up to four-family. Now, typically, five-family and over is considered commercial via the State Board of Equalization. But those are the types of things that, as policy, this body needs to discuss. This bill, as it reads, is for single-family owner-occupied. Now, this question of, a duplex, okay? So let's say you've got two habitable.
Can I just back up a minute?
ma'am.
This
Yes,
bill
Mr.
says single family. It doesn't say owner occupied. Single family. So it applies to all 200,000 residences.
Mr.
Single family
Chairman,
resident estate.
that is accurate.
Yeah, okay.
This does not
So
require
there's no application.
a
none of that.
taxpayer.
Yeah,
There's no requirement that taxpayer take any action for this bill to be
Yeah, that-
implemented. So on a single-family residential, county assessors do not know who occupies a home. In order to identify that, that takes the property owner providing that information.
right.
In this bill, it's every single-family property in the state of Wyoming. And when I say property, let me clarify, every single-family residential structure.
Correct. Representative Bear has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is an appropriate time to go into the land portion of it. You and I have had this conversation when we talk about residential land, and this is why this particular bill excludes land. Can you explain how abstracts are done on residential land as how they associate with the building?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Director.
Chairman, Representative Bear. So with residential land, we identify in the CAMA system residential improved land and residential vacant land. And that's how it's broken apart. So when I say improved, that means that it's improved, there's a structure on that land. And so we can identify that. One of the challenges for automating a process to include land is There are several bills that you'll consider over the next few days that talk about associated land or 1 acre of land. Now let's think back about appraisal. Think of your own property, think of your neighbor's property. When you buy 1 acre of land versus 5 acres of land, typically it is not a 1-to-1. Typically, I don't pay $10,000 per acre on a 5-acre parcel, or I may get a 7-acre parcel, but I may pay the same amount of money for the 7-acre parcel that I did the 5-acre parcel. It just happens to be how that subdivision was broken out. So we don't value land in the assessor's office by the first, every square foot is $10, or every acre is $10,000. So an assessor is valuing that residential improved land as a whole. And so if it's the will of the legislature to include the residential land, I would just ask that you consider the language of associated improved residential land.
That's what, and I have that written down for an amendment, actually, so you could administer that, you think, if we include it like that, associated improved residential land.
It's just another piece that we're gonna ask the assessors to take on, should this bill be amended in a very short time period. What I would respectfully request is perhaps for the first year, we leave the bill as is, related to that residential structure. But if you wish to come back in this bill and say effective January 1, 2025,
Right.
which gives the assessors more time to identify that residential land and how they've got it categorized, I think that would be a cleaner option.
Okay, and that's actually what I have written here for a potential amendment. Vice Chair Oakley and then Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know you wouldn't have numbers in your head, but the associated improved residential land would make this significantly not only more difficult to administer, but we're talking about, I mean, at least doubling. I mean, what are you thinking as far as the impact of that?
Well, you go from 200,000 homes to now 200,000 associated improved land. So it goes from 200,000 to 400 is my thought. Is that,
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, I would ask this body to provide a little guidance. Because what we're doing now with the bill as it exists is we're taking that single-family residential structure, it's one abstract line, and we're comparing this value to this value and making a calculation to put that. So if you add the land, what is your intent? Is your intent that we take the improvement value, we add the land value, we get an aggregate value, apply a 5%, and then split that out? And because we've got to get down to the administrative level of how much exemption are we putting on each one of those abstract codes. So if it's the intent that it's an overall for just this residential structure and the residential improved land, maybe the residential structure goes up 3% and this exemption doesn't apply. But residential land, because you're typically looking at a smaller value with the land, except for some of our scenic areas in the state, $30,000 can go up more than 5% on a residential lot fairly quickly. So would it be the intent of this body to apply 5% on the improvement and create an exemption, 5% on the land, create an exemption? Or do somehow we have to add those together and then apply this exemption? And then if we do that, where do we put it? Where do we put that assessed value of an exemption? That's simply the more changes you make to the bill as written, it's just going to take a little more due diligence on the Department of Revenue in the rulemaking process to make sure that we've made that very clear, because I take it, it's a huge responsibility to ensure that whatever changes we make in statute, that all 23 county assessors, along with their 200 employees, along with the Department of Revenue, have made it clear enough so the taxpayer's not confused and that taxpayers aren't treated differently. So anything that changes that is effective for 2024, we'll be responsible for promulgating emergency rules so that that can be implemented. We'll have a little more time and there won't have to be emergency if we have bills that pass that are effective for 2025. Gives a little more time for that process.
Representative Bear had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, simple is better, and I believe in the KISS principle. So when we talk about residential land and it being not separated out specifically to a single-family structure, as this bill is purporting an exemption to, you and I've discussed this, residential land goes all the way up to those fourplex structures. So my question is, if we were going to simplify this and include the land, would it be true that we would need to include all of the residential structures and then apply an exemption to all of the residential land? That would be probably the most simple way of doing it. Would that be an accurate statement?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, it's the person writing the query, okay, to get to the data. So if the first selection criteria is a single-family residential structure, and basically I've called out all of those, and then I look at their associated land, we can do that. So it does not have to be applied to multifamily properties in order to accomplish that. If the will of the legislature is that we are going to apply it to those multifamily structures, we'll just put that in our first selection criteria.
It'll be interesting when we get to the assessors, see how, well, we know what we currently do. They're assessed separately, but what's easiest to administer? Okay,
So, Mr. Chairman,
fairest.
this bill requires that we use technology to identify the single-family residential structures, and then we do the calculation. The burden is on the assessor's office to determine if the two circumstances in this bill where that exemption is not applicable, it's the burden of the assessor to make sure that they're doing the research and running the queries to determine whether there was a structural change that caused an increase in value, or whether the property was acquired the past year by the current tax year. So all property is taxed and assessed to the owner of record as of January 1. So that's why that language of prior count, that property owner acquired it that prior calendar year. If they acquired at any time during 2023, if they were the owner on January 1, 2024, that's who the assessment goes to, and that's who the tax bill goes to. If you buy a property after January 1, our statutes say that that's a contractual agreement between the seller and the buyer as to who pays those taxes. But related to the assessment, the assessor's going to look at that owner on January 1.
Okay, I'd like to move on to Assessor Huxtable. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, Chairman Harshman and members of the committee. My name is Dixie Huxtable. I am the Converse County Assessor, and today I'm currently serving as the Assessors Association Legislative Chair. We thank you for allowing us to comment on the bill. I have a page full of comments, and my esteemed Director of Department of Revenue covered a lot of it for me. So we'll just pick up a couple of things. First of all, I want you to know that the assessors met last week. We talked about this. I think I gave this in some previous testimony, but I wanted to make sure you understood that all 23 counties assessors participated in that conversation, specifically about the bills that have been drafted, along with the concepts that have been drafted in the bills that have been filed. There was a unanimous agreement of all 23 counties that this was the best short-term immediate relief we could give our people outside of the property tax relief program. We absolutely believe the property tax relief program needs to keep going. However, you need to amend it, but don't kill it, because it's a valuable tool for our taxpayers.
Let me just say to that bill that we have to amend the program with tiers,
Yes, sir.
the property tax refund. Even if that bill doesn't make it, the program still lives. Just so I just want everybody hearing that there are no efforts at all to get rid of that program to this date that I know of. And I think the only way to possibly do that would be some kind of budget amendment to defund it. So just so everybody's clear on that, that program's gonna keep rolling forward, I think. So
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman. Thank you for that clarification. We believe that, but it's nice to hear that that's out there because our taxpayers deserve that, and we appreciate that. The exemption, whether it's a homeowner's exemption or excess valuation, this bill is one that we all supported as well. There were some concerns, there was some discussion about administration. Initially, we were concerned whether the system could do it. We've had conversation with the department, we've had conversation with the software vendor. We've looked at the queries, we've looked at our data. All 23 counties have had a chance to do that. We are confident that as it's written, we can administer it for 2024. Yes, there's gonna be some heavy lifting for the assessors, and we're up to that task. Many have already started some queries, so they're ready to go should this pass immediately. But we believe that as it's written, we could administer it. If there are any amendments to it, that may delay it, specifically the land. I want to touch a little bit on the land. As the director talked about, there are different approved appraisal methodologies for land. So it's not always a straight line where it's per dollar per unit, per square foot, or per acre. There's linear where you start with a base and then you go straight up. There's an MRA, you start with a base and then you do a curve because that's just the methodology that's out there that fits that land economic area the best. There's a graduate, which means every unit is different. The first unit is this, the second one is this, and so on and so forth. And they're all valid, very valid appraisal methodologies in the international assessors world. So when you start adding land and you've got all these other methodologies, picking 1 acre is going to be challenging for us to figure out how to calculate and get that in there. When you talk about associated improved land, I, as an assessor, need some guidance. What does associated land mean? We have parcels that have less than 1 acre. We have parcels that have thousands of acres that are residential improved. They've got a house on them, therefore they're residential improved, or maybe they have an outbuilding on them and a house. And so they're not ag, but is all 2,000, 5,000 acres associated? I need a little clarity for that because I don't believe that's the intention of this bill. So when you add the land, that just adds one more complication. Give us a year, we'll figure it out. But this year, it's just not gonna work to be timely. The timeline, as Director Henson talked about, our notices have to be out by the 4th Monday in April or soon thereafter. Then you've got a 30-day appeal period, you've got a hearing date set, you've got exchange of evidence, you've got county board hearings, which are organized and managed by your commissioners and your county clerks. And oh, yes, they have an election this year, so most of them have already told us that there are certain times of the calendar that we cannot have county board hearings. So that timeline is very, very specific for us. And for some counties, critical by the time they get their data to a mailing service to get these out timely, so all the taxpayers have an equal and fair shot at looking at their values. So we really need this to time is of the essence, to get this done, and so that we can administer it as good and fair for our taxpayers as we can. We're ready to do that, but there is gonna be some limits to what we can do in a short amount of time. I would comment also, there was a question about commercials. Just a statement that most commercial properties in Wyoming are on a cost basis. Most of them do not have a market adjustment applied because we typically do not have a lot of sales in this state, across the state, to put market adjustments. So the increases in commercial costs typically come from cost tables that are provided to us through the department, through the software. Whereas residentials are typically a market adjusted cost. It starts with the cost and then it's got market adjustments applied. So there is a vast difference in how they're valued, and that may impact your thought processes, but I just wanted to be clear about that. And then I would stand for any further questions.
Members, any questions? Okay, we'll, Northrop, Representative Northrop, and then we'll go Representative Bear, and then Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably should have asked this when the department was talking. Can you have a discussion about what would happen if we took this back to the 21 tax level and started it, a clawback of, if you will, of 21 and put a backfill back into it? What would that, how big a monkey wrench will that throw in it?
Go ahead, Director, do you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Northrup. So as I mentioned previously, right now, property is assessed and taxed as it exists on January 1 of each year to the owner of record on that date. So any mechanism or policy or law that requires the assessor go back to a prior year is going to be burdensome. And the reason I say that is you all traveled, all of you that are, even if you're from Laramie County, you came to, to this building. The only way going back to a prior year value works is if you actually believe that property exists in the state of Wyoming as it did in a prior year. Because when we talk about total values and a fiscal note, that's one thing. But for the property owner, you're talking about the residential structure, you're talking about outbuildings, you're talking about land and the marketplace. And if we roll back to a prior year and then simply add percentages, how are they ever going to know if they've been treated fairly? So it really is a challenge to go back to 2019 or 2020. Just to give you an idea, we ran some numbers. In 2019, statewide, we had 308,279 real property parcels in Wyoming. In 2023, that number was 314,318. Now, all I've identified is the number of accounts. I can tell you we added 10,593 single-family residential structures since 2019 to the tax rolls. That's just going to 2023. So how do we go back? Even if we wanted to roll back to a prior value, let's say we go back to a prior value on those that existed in 2020. But what do we do with the ones that just built in 2022? Are they at current value? There's a lot of unanswered questions when you roll back to a prior year. So I truly appreciate the question. Administratively, rolling back to a number, but I've been administering property tax since 1988, and I have to answer that taxpayer that says, wait a minute, are you treating me the same as you're treating my neighbor? And that's where those rollback challenges lie. And the other part of that is we're talking taxable assessed value, and I think that's a question that we have on the committee that we haven't really addressed either. That doesn't necessarily mean your taxes didn't go up. We have a new community college district in Campbell County. All of their taxes, even if their assessed value stayed exactly the same, the voters in that area voted to create a community college district and tax themselves 2.5 mils. By looking at the basis of the value, which is what this is and what these discussions are regarding, that doesn't necessarily mean that the tax bill, and I don't want any of the citizens of Wyoming to think that any of this specifically looks at a tax dollar amount from one year to the next. We're really just trying to address what is the basis of those taxes. So I hope that answered your question.
Representative Storer after.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to go back to the director since my predecessor did that, and then I'll come back at a later time to ask Chairman Huxtable another question, because you've brought up some interesting things. First of all, you mentioned earlier that it's really about who writes the query, and I don't think the previous question really is asking for information that is not already in your database. So it's really about asking, creating good queries to get the information and then apply the math to it. So I guess I'd push back as to how challenging it is. It will be challenging for that first person that develops the query and decides this is how it should be done. And maybe they make a mistake and we discover that later. Absolutely, that could be a problem. But once it's calculated, figured out, then it's passed out to 23 assessors, and we're off and running, I believe. That's how I would envision that. Well, I'll just let you answer that. Is that an accurate statement? Well, let me qualify that. I say that based on this particular bill versus some other bills, because I think this bill, it's actually simplified because we're dealing with single-family structures. So your comment about, all these other complexities is really simplified in this particular bill. So I'll add that comment to it.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, you may recall a couple years ago when we started down this path of property tax relief. My statement at that time is still my statement today. To whom do you wish to provide property tax relief? And that relates to your question about the queries. And the only reason that we have the functionality is due to the legislature's efforts that we happen to be a state in Wyoming that has one single computer-assisted mass appraisal system. And we are very fortunate that that gives us functionality that other states don't have. In other states, every county assessor's on their own out there finding a CAMA system. Wyoming was smart back in the 80s, and we have one. And you're right, we can share queries, and we've got assessors that do that. They write their own queries, we write queries. It really is a team on behalf of the citizens of Wyoming. And so I think your statement is accurate, but it all goes down to who do you want to provide relief to? Is it the single-family residential homeowner? Is it that income-producing property that happens to be used as a residence? What is it that you want to provide as tax relief?
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Representative Storr's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Henson and Assessor Huxtable. Give me a couple minutes just to walk through one concept here. So as you say, who do we wish to provide property tax relief to? In the case of HB 45, if we want to implement it this year, we cannot distinguish between second homeowners and primary owner occupied. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, again, it does require the homeowner, the property owner, to notify the county assessor that they actually reside in that home. So that would be an application process. And we've actually run some numbers on statewide. We anticipate approximately 178,000 folks are owner-occupied homes. And so that would be the number of applications that would be required to be processed. And the other thing that's important to note is if you have an exemption that is backfilled by the state, let's take for an example the veterans exemption. So there's a veterans exemption that's granted, but there's money set aside in the state treasurer's budget to backfill that. So that value is still taxable, it's still assessed, it's just that the state sets aside a pot of money that they give to the county treasurers and they distribute it just as if the property owner paid it. However, if you've got an exemption where it's exempt, it's never backfilled, it's just a reduction in that value, that taxable value, the number of assessed dollars that a fire district can levy their 3 mills on, that number has got to be in the abstract that the assessor provides to the State Board of Equalization no later than June 1st. So anytime you have an application process or notification to the assessor, there's a really short window between, let's say the applications are due the 4th Monday in May, similar to the veterans. Doesn't matter with the veterans because it's backfilled. But if it had to reduce that taxable value in that abstract that the assessor has to give to the state board on June 1st, that's tough. That is tough to get all of those keyed into the system. And that's why for implementing tax relief in 2024, it would be important that there not be a reliance on the taxpayer to somehow have a responsibility in this process. For 2025, we could probably get the word out.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's just talk through some assumptions, possible scenarios that might find ourselves in at the end of this session. One is that the constitutional amendment from SJ3 survives and will be on the ballot in November 2024. And also there is, I think Representative Allred has a kind of a trigger bill that would create a change in assessment for either for residential or possibly primary owner occupied. So at that point, should that happen, I assume then the assessors would figure out a way to query or have folks apply or you would want to identify who is primary owner occupied and who is not. And I'm just wondering whether you've thought through like what is the right process to do that? Because it's also something that could be applied to this bill in the future, it seems to me, as well.
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storer, we've given, this has been an interim topic for a while and definitely been in the forefront of the Department of Revenue's mind. A lot of different things that we could do. If it were to be in place that the taxpayer needed to apply or notify, and it was statewide, I believe administratively the best way to approach that, sorry, Property Tax Division, I always want to use technology. I would prefer to stand up a portal on the internet, and that would be the one place that property owners across the state of Wyoming would go to notify the Department of Revenue that this is my name, this is how this property is owned, and this is where I reside for whatever time the legislature deems appropriate. And then because we have access to the CAMA system in all 23 counties, we would then, using technology, provide that to the county assessor. I, as an administrator of property tax, want to make that process as easy as possible for the taxpayer. But I would also ask, if we go down that path, that we make that portal the one place. If you get to a situation where I sent that piece of paper in the mail, or I did this, or I did that, the last thing I ever want to have is that a taxpayer qualifies for tax relief, and simply because they didn't know about it, or simply because it didn't arrive in the mail by the statutory date, they don't receive that. That's a bad place in my shoes.
And so, yeah, and that's really and you're talking 178,000 estimated occupied out of 200,000 roughly.
Yes, Mr.
Is
Chairman.
that right? So it's the vast majority are owner occupied.
About 240,000 single-family
Oh,
residential.
there are 240.
I
Okay.
believe that that's a correct statement. And then, yeah, we anticipated, just based on census numbers of how many actually own them and occupy their home, that would be approximately the number of applications that you would be needing to process.
Okay, very good, yeah. Okay, Assessor Huxtable, anything else? We're gonna,
I don't. I just want to talk a little bit about the rollback scenario. So the query is going to pull a value from 1 year for an abstract code to a value in a current year for an abstract code. The system does not know, that query has no way of knowing what changed on that property in between. That's going to be back on the lift of the assessor to go back and look at those properties and say, do they qualify? Did they add a garage? Did they add an addition? Did something else change? So that's the heavy lift. That means it's not automated anymore, and you've expanded it to include a lot more properties. So that's why we feel that in a timely manner, as we're talking to get it at this point, it just can't be done for the rollback for this year. Could be maybe for some future years, but not for this year. Thank you.
Mayor, so we're gonna, Vice Chair Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank the assessors and Director Henson. I know how much you've been working on this on top of all the other duties. And at least myself, I hear it's gonna be a Herculean effort to do anything, and that we need to keep it straightforward and simple. I hear you. Thank you.
Okay, we're ready to move on. Do you have a question? I wanted questions, not comments. Now, we're not at that point. Okay, question from Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Huxtable, you had mentioned that you, as a group, had reviewed this bill and several other bills and proposals and determined that this bill was really the preferred for the assessors. Did you have an opportunity to look at House Bill 127? Because that bill came out kind of late, and it's very similar to this one, but different.
Good, and that'll be our next bill up, so you'll be up testifying on that as well.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, no, as an association, we did not, because it came out after our meeting.
Okay, very good. Okay, so thank you, ladies. Stay close because we're just getting started today. So thank you for being here. I'd like to open this up now. Usually we go for or against public comment. Any other elected officials, I'll knock those out first. So go ahead, welcome. Any other elected officials plan on speaking on this bill, please come up and have a seat. Okay, good morning. Introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, Chairman Harshman, Emily Parvasini, Sublette County Treasurer, also President of the County Treasurers Association. We also discussed this bill, and of all of the property assist bills, reform bills, this was also our preferred bill because it treats all of the counties the same. It treats all of the property owners the same. It's fair, it's equitable, and it doesn't cut the legs out from some of the counties that have very small budgets. I do like that the increase would be capped at 5%, and if it's only 3%, it would only go up 3% or less. I know some counties didn't necessarily see valuation increases in the last couple of years, and so that would be taken into consideration as well. The only thing, Mr. Chairman, that the county treasurers, when we talked about this, would like, and I don't know that it would necessarily need to be included, is on page 4, where it talks about, I think it was on page 4, the change being put on the assessment. We would also like to have that notification of the difference on our tax bills when we send them out, so that when a property is sold and a realtor gets a hold of us and says, hey, I want to know how much to estimate for their tax bill next year for these new property owners, we'll have that on the tax bill that we send out instead of having it only be on the assessment.
Okay, we'll run down that statute, and that's a mere amendment kind of thing. I think that's probably good for all these bills. Very good idea, thank you.
But Mr. Chairman, that was the only other thing that we wanted to do on this bill. We like it just the way it is, and I would stand for any questions.
Okay, any questions for the good treasurer? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for being here. You had mentioned that this, you'd like to see this on the bill as well. Does the bill differentiate the land and the structure the same way that the assessment does?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Treasurer.
Chairman, yes, it does. It does have a breakdown of how much is the residential portion and how much is the land portion on the bill.
Yeah, that's the beauty of property taxes. It's the most transparent tax we have.
Indeed.
I mean, I think everybody in this room can tell you what your property tax is. I don't know how much I spent on income tax or sales tax, but property tax, I could tell you. Wow, okay, very good. Appreciate all the good questions, appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other elected folks? Okay, we're gonna open this up, usually public comments for or against. And I think we'll just maybe, if anybody's opposed to this bill, we'd like to hear from you. And then anybody in support of it has got suggestions. Any opposition? Mr. Brown, come on up. Anybody wants to speak against the bill? And then we'll open it up for those in favor of the bill and go to there. Okay, good morning. Introduce yourself, please. Is your mic on? Is your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
And
it
if,
is.
pull it closer. Yeah, there you go, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
My
you.
name's Gary Brown. I'm a citizen of Laramie County here in Cheyenne, Central Committee member of the Republican Party. Looked at this bill and I see some problems with it. And a lot of people that I've talked to and looked at the bill are very concerned that it specifies structure. And I know that you and I have talked about this. But the people just, when they see the property separated out from the structure, and that's how they see this bill, they see a problem because they say, okay, they're gonna cap my property at this much, or my structure at this much, but they can do anything they want with my property. And that's how they see this bill. Whether it's a fact or not, that's how they see it. So that's the number one problem I see with it. The other problem I see with this is that it's capped at 5%. Over the last 10 years, well, over 8 years, because the last 2 years, property tax jumped, you know, unbelievably. But over the prior 8 years, the average that property tax went up was about 3.5%. And I want to say this so I don't get in trouble with you. There's only one political ideology or philosophy that believes that if you decrease the amount of increase, that you're cutting something. And people need their property taxes cut. They don't need them increased just a little bit. They need them cut. And so that's what people really want to see. I would like to bring up some statistics that I have for Laramie County. And I understand that all counties are different. But here in Laramie County, in 2023, the total amount of revenue taken in by Laramie County was $116,852,794. The amount of that was property tax was $32,033,230. The expenditures for that year was $84,700,976. The county banked $32,151,818. That's $118,588 more than they took in property taxes. That's in 1 year.
Sounds like you need to go to your county commissioners and ask, you know, really, maybe there's one from Laramie County here can
Well,
talk to that.
and then in 2021, they banked in excess of $3.8 million above what they took in property taxes. In 2012, they banked in excess of $3,600,000 more than they took in property taxes. People need their property taxes cut. And when I have citizens, senior citizens that come to me and tell me I'm losing my home that I've lived in for years. One lady took me in her house. I'm sorry. One lady took me in her house. She lived in that house so long. And she showed me where they had the marks on the doorway. I remember my parents doing that as we grew up. She had the marks on her doorway of her children as they grew up. And she told me, she said, Gary, I'm losing my home. I'm losing my memories of my children. People need help. And I just don't believe this is going to do it. So I'm opposed to this. I'll try to answer any questions I
Okay,
can.
any questions, Mr. Brown?
Pardon me?
I say any questions of Mr. Brown? Okay, appreciate you being here. Thank you for your testimony. Anybody else have any problems with this bill, opposed to it? Okay, we'll move any other testimony on this bill. Go ahead, come on up, you bet, you're welcome. Anybody else, you can fill these chairs and it'll expedite the process. And we can get more voices heard that way. So go ahead and fill the chairs. Good morning.
Good morning, my name is Ken Johnston.
Okay, is that green light on?
I guess it's on.
Okay, perfect. I can hear you now. Good.
Okay.
Very good.
My name's Ken Johnston. I have a home here in Cheyenne, 702 Oakhurst. And concern I have, I was here actually to testify for your House Bill 18, and I was sorry that that did not go because my taxes have increased double since I purchased my home in 2014, and the assessed value has doubled. So I'm really concerned. I'm not sure if I'm for or against this bill, but yeah, we need some help. And it's capping what the taxes are is very important. I heard you make a statement earlier that you're not looking to get rid of the CAMA system. If I heard that correctly, I don't hear well, but if I did, I'm sorry to hear that, because that is not a fair system. That system there's no transparency to it. Just so you know, the assessor sent me a bill for my home here in Cheyenne, and as soon as I appealed it, they dropped it $60,000. Now, excuse me, I read the Supreme Court, what it said, that you can't challenge what the assessor's done unless you can show that in fact they've done it in error. Well, the CAMA system doesn't allow a citizen like me to go in and see what they've done. The only thing I know is that they reduced it by $60,000 as soon as I said, hey, your assessment's incorrect. And that they don't allow you to utilize what the market value. Yeah, they take a area that's wider than mine. I had 2 homes that sold next to me, and they didn't consider those, okay? So I'm really concerned about the CAMA system. There's no transparency with that, none whatsoever. You know, Mr. Chairman, you know, it's a real problem for us folks because, you know, I'm fortunate that the increases haven't caused me to move out. I'm 81 years old, and they haven't caused me to move out because I can do that. But I have 2 other properties that I rent out here in Cheyenne, and they did the same thing. They increased the taxes over what I even paid for the property, and so I appealed that. They reduced it down to a couple of thousand over what I paid for it. But that system in itself is not transparent to any citizens. I'm in an appeal right now for my property taxes. I've gone through the Laramie County, and in the testimony, they basically said I can't come down and see what they've done. I can't use the system to determine whether or not what they've done is correct. So there's no transparency. So this is, in itself, I think is unconstitutional. Now, that's my perspective. With regard to the bill here, I heard a lot of testimony here, and it's like we're taking the land isn't included. That should be all one part. If it's going to have a cap, I mean, I'm thrilled that it's a cap because my property taxes hasn't been far more than the 5% that they're talking about, but it should include the land because the assessors, then, my opinion, they're going to go in and say, well, the land is continuing to increase at a greater rate than what we can put the cap on your house, so we'll just increase that. So they'll come out with the same result on the thing. I've talked with an assessor, because I have a ranch also out of Wheatland, and I've talked with the assessor there, and she was very frustrated because they can't do anything because they're tied to this CAMA system. They can't do anything else. They can go in and say, well, I'll downgrade whatever you have for the house to make this thing less. That's not the way we should be operating. It's not at all. You know, I paid $365,000 for my home in Western Hills. They assessed it for $732,000 this last year, and then reduced it by $60,000. That's not right, folks. You know, the citizens are getting screwed by this system. I'm sorry, but that's really what it is on that. And I see that you're only starting this with this year. That means my tax assessment is already $670-some thousand on this, on what I have, rather than, you know, going back. You know, I would like, if 18 would have passed, that you do it based on the house when you buy it. I don't care what my neighbor's willing to pay, but if you go down to, you know, and because, sorry, what I see here is, and as an analogy, you're taxing me on when somebody else is willing to pay, and this CAMA system that I can't get into to find out how it actually works unless I pay thousands of dollars to have my own CAMA system. Because I looked at that.
Yeah.
I did.
No, that's awesome.
For several $1,000s, I
Yeah.
could get that program. You know, but That's pretty expensive for a citizen to have to go
Yeah.
do. But it's no different than if you go down to Denver Mattress or one of the mattress places and buy a mattress, Sealy mattress for $600 or $800 and go across the street to Sam's Club and buy the same thing for $400. You should be taxed on it at the $800 value. Well, that's what they're doing here with this program, because they're taking, this system and throwing everything into it, saying everything's equal, but it's not. It's not equal, folks. We really need your help. This is at least a start on helping the citizens, but it's not where we ought to be. You ought to be tied in, and I'll tell you, the only thing I've ever saw that California did right was their Proposition 13. You pay for the house, whatever it is, your resident, and they can't increase the property value over 3% every year,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, the acquisition. Yeah, and we've had that debate.
And I realize it takes
Yeah,
a
takes
constitutional amendment, but folks, you guys are here, you folks, all of you here can save us from this. And then it's simple. You increase the value 3% every year and tax it on that. If somebody comes in next door to me and pays 5 times what my house I paid for it, hey, they know what they're doing and they can be taxed on that. There's nothing inequality about that. Like I said, if you go to the mattress place and pay $800 for one that you can get across the street for $200, you're getting the bargain.
I'm gonna just pause for a minute. Does anybody here, I just wanna, because we got a lot of other people that wanna visit.
sorry.
So, no, you're great. I appreciate you getting up and coming here this morning. I just wanna make sure, any questions? Representative Bear, I just wanna make sure for Mr. Johnson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here, and I appreciate your passion about this issue. For 81, I will say you're a very sharp fella. I hope I have that as well. One of the things that you may not be aware of, the difference between House Bill 18 and House Bill 45 here that we're talking about right now, is that House Bill 18 was a trigger bill which required an amendment to the Constitution. So it would have been delayed even a year later than this bill. So my question is, is this a value that we're getting a 1-year head start with this bill versus House Bill 18?
Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Well, I guess my answer to that would be, it depends on how the 18 would have been actually implemented. If it had been implemented based on, this is what you purchased the property, which goes back to wherever it is. Mine would go back to 2014, then I would say the 18 is better, okay? Because it gets the people back to where they are. I heard this gentleman before me talk about the lady that was gonna potentially lose her home because of the taxing. That's insanity, folks.
Well, and I think, yeah, okay, and so that bill, I appreciate that question. I think, and I'll just say this to everybody, there's no silver bullet on this. We're gonna hear about 10 bills, and we're probably gonna move 4 of them forward. And they all take different parts of the problem. We're gonna hear a bill today on the floor, gets rid of property tax for 97% of the homes in Wyoming. My little bill with a 2-cent sales tax. So we're gonna debate that idea. Hopefully it can get the 2/3 so we can actually hear it in committee. But we got Representative Locke's got 2 bills coming up next that attack this problem differently. So I just tell everybody, it's not one bill is gonna solve all this. So this is one little piece of the problem, and we're gonna keep moving forward. So I really, again, I was gonna say, for 81, you look younger than most of this committee. Really, whatever you're doing, keep doing. You're doing great. So
My
really
wife's
appreciate
24
you
years
being.
younger than I am.
Well, we appreciate you being here, and any last thing that, I think you covered it well, and I appreciate you being here. And we're always available too. Any of us, you can pull us off the floor, talk to us some more, those kind of things when we get it up there, so.
As I said, the big concern, I know you're using this CAMA system, I think it's unfair, because we can't go in and see what they've done. And if they go in and, come back, as soon as I make an appeal, reduce the value that they had, then they're not doing their job. That's
Yeah.
that's all there is to it.
Yeah, and I appreciate it.
So that's,
Okay.
thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate you being here. So it's about, okay, which one of you gentlemen are next? Okay. Okay, introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Reeman here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. We don't have county commissioners here because they are currently voting on all of the bills that are under consideration. And we'll have that. I don't know Mr. Brown myself, but I will make sure that county commissioners from Laramie County reach out to him and discuss those issues. Mr. Chairman, stealing from you, there is no silver bullet in this conversation. And if you'll indulge me, I think it's important to talk about a few things and for me to demonstrate that no two counties in Wyoming are alike as it comes to property taxes. I'll start with currently in Wyoming, and this is fiscal year 23 data, 7 counties collect 73.37% of all property taxes. Those 7 counties are Campbell, Converse, Laramie, Natrona, Sublette, Sweetwater, and Teton. The bottom 9 counties collect a total of $29 million and represent 7.6% of all of that property tax that's collected statewide. 6 of those counties are hardship counties under sort of the direct distribution formula, if you will. So in other words, they are incapable of generating more than $300,000 per mill levied. What I can tell you today is that 2 counties actually just moved out of hardship status. That's something to celebrate in some regard. Those 2 counties are Bighorn County and Crook County. Bighorn County is now at $303,000 per mill levied, and Crook County is at $328,000 per mill levied. I just touch on those tier 1 counties. 3 of those counties are school recapture districts. So for example, we've got 2 that are recapture districts based on minerals, Sublette and Campbell County. We have another one that's a recapture district based on residential property taxes. And Teton County distributes back $82 million a year right now to other districts across this state simply based on their real estate, their residential real estate. And things can change. It was only a couple of years ago when I was here before this committee and a lot of other committees talking about mineral ad valorem and trying to fix that system because Campbell County actually dropped out of school recapture because of issues we were experiencing. So things can change in this setup. Mr. Chairman, if you look at the mill levy by county, I mentioned those that are under 300,000. The lowest is Niobrara County at $164,000 per mill levied. Highest in the state is Campbell County at $5.7 million per mill levied. That means that it takes 34.66 mills in Niobrara County to equal 1 Campbell County mill. That's actually up from fiscal year 22 when it was 30 mills to 1 Campbell County mill. And I've got the data for each one of your counties. The closest comparator to Campbell County is currently Converse County at 1.3, Teton at 1.47. So a lot of data that I'm throwing at you there. To demonstrate a little bit more on this in terms of what this means, what property taxes mean, or any of these taxes mean to counties, let me just use Washakie County. 25% of their entire budget, their $6 million budget a year, is payment in lieu of taxes. So federal money for non-taxable federal lands and direct distribution. 25% of their entire budget are based on 2 sources that generally don't go up. Now, thank you for the increase last year or the last biennium to direct distribution, and thank you for your work yesterday to increase direct distribution. That will have an impact, a positive impact for Washakie County. The next 18% of their property taxes or of their taxes, their revenue comes from property taxes. The reason I bring that up is that 43% of their revenue are those three sources. And here we are talking about whether we should cap the third part of that stool. So we're constraining, we're almost to a point where 50% of their entire budget generally won't be able to move all that far. I think that's something that we have to consider in all of this particular space as we move forward. I think you have to dig into the numbers too. Yes, we've had some increases. No doubt we've had increases in this state. I've experienced that. All of you've experienced that. But we've got to break that down into the numbers across the state. Between 2018 and 2023, Niobrara County's entire increase from residential property taxes is $43,378 total. That's a county that just a couple of years ago, and I'm really proud of the commissioners there because they saved for a lot of years and planned for it, just began offering health insurance to their employees. And it's only for their employee. It's not for the family, it's for the employee. They're now able to do that because of the modest little increase that they got from residential property taxes and a few other things that have come their way. But we also have to look at other things. We talk about inflation and cost of road materials. It's $100,000 a mile for Niobrara County to work on a road because I got to take gravel from the south end of the county all the way to the north end of the county in order to do that work. So it's pretty expensive for them. Hot Springs County, total increase, $169,000. I could give you a few others here. Certainly Teton County, they doubled the amount of property tax they took during that time period. That's on 7 mills. The lowest mill levy in the state of Wyoming is in Teton County, and they still doubled. Part of the problem, again, the levers that you get to pull, you can constrain those those revenues for Washakie County. Teton County commissioners just get to double their mill if they need to, or because they're under the cap of 12 mills in the state of Wyoming. So I think all these things are critically important that we think about. Mr. Chairman, I'll end there, but my members, in terms of our bill review committee, and if they hold to what we discussed yesterday as a full body today, we will reluctantly support House Bill 45, but we believe it's part of a package. We look at it as the reform part of the package, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. The other part of that is we do need to have relief, and we're a part of that. The optional refund program at the county, we had a discussion about other counties getting involved in that particular program, and certainly appreciate the efforts that the state of Wyoming is making in all of this space. Mr. Chairman, I can go into a whole lot more around the possible ornaments that we might add to this tree and the problems that might exist with that. Perhaps I'll wait for that relative to House Bill 127, but as I mentioned, we will, if it holds, be supportive of House Bill 45.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman,
Any
I take
questions for Mr. Reeman? Vice Chair Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quickly, what were the three counties? It was Niobrara, Crook, what was the third?
Sorry,
Go ahead. It was Crook and Bighorn, wasn't it? Or-
the three
That came out
counties that are
hardship.
not hardship in the bottom tier,
The bottom, bottom three.
that would be Bighorn, Crook, and Johnson County in those bottom three,
Yeah.
or bottom 9.
And what
That
are the
moved out.
lowest three?
Sorry.
What are the three counties that bring in the least amount per mill?
Niobrara,
Yeah, just
Goshen. Anybody else out there? We're making the Niobrara, Goshen.
Mr. Chairman, the three lowest per mill are Niobrara is the lowest, at 164,000. Washakie is second at 181,000. And Weston is third lowest at 204,000 per mill.
I apologize to Goshen, my Goshen County friends, sorry. Okay, very good. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ryman, you know, we've talked a lot about the hardship counties and those who need the help, and I think we've heard from the executive that there's a good chance that's gonna happen no matter what we do here, or maybe it'll be in the budget bill, some sort of relief to cover this for those counties that need that help. But, you know, I come from one of those counties that you mentioned that has a massive value to our mills. Are you seeing within the upper echelon where counties are starting to look at their voters and their taxpayers and say, you know what, maybe we ought to pull the mill back a little bit? Are you seeing anything within the county association where mill levies are being reduced? Because we at a state level, we put a maximum that they can assess, but I think there's only 2 or 3 counties that don't assess the absolute maximum. Is that accurate?
Go ahead, Mr. Reaman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, it is correct. There are 2 counties that do not assess the full 12 mills. Those 2 counties are Teton County, which is at 7.3. I have it here. I'll give it to you exactly. Teton County is currently at 7.379 mills. Campbell County is the other at 11.1 mills. Mr. Chairman, Representative Barrett, it is a conversation that absolutely happens. In fact, I was talking to one of your county commissioners yesterday, and they're looking at how they might be able to reduce down from that 12 mills. In that conversation, it was looking at 10 mills. It was where that gentleman was looking at. I can tell you that Fremont County moved down to 10 mills a couple of years ago. They moved back up. I don't know the entire discussion relative to that, but it's important to kind of look at the overall structure of this. You can provide residential relief of, you know, say $25 to $40 per mill levied to taxpayers by the county reducing that mill. But that comes at a cost of the assessment of the other property that you're looking at, in particular minerals, and that can be a pretty considerable cost. You only get to assess those minerals once in terms of their severance, so it's part of the equation. I have a county commissioner that you know, a former county commissioner that I discussed this issue with at one point in time, and he said, hey, we were looking at reducing ours quite considerably because we do get quite a bit from minerals. But it was the company that came to him and said, don't do that. You only get to assess us that one time. You need to build the revenue because times are gonna get hard, things are gonna change, and so you need to assess us at those full 12 mills.
Very good. We're gonna have to keep moving here, so I really appreciate you, and we could continue this all day, but I'm gonna move on. There's more folks so appreciate you being here. Mr. Moline, introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. As you mentioned, none of these bills are perfect. One thing I appreciate about this bill is it protects us in the future. It limits that property tax increase to no more than 5%. It can be less. One of the problems is that by not having the rollback, we've already had the large increases. So it's an increase of 5% on the larger numbers. You know, that would be your decision if you want to do it to a rollback. I understand from the assessors and the difficulties of doing that, but a point I want to make is it is hitting, the way this bill sits, it's a 5% increase from a bigger number. And another thing, I do appreciate that right now it's just the structures, and I understand the reason why. I would like to see in the future, you know, if you put a delayed effective date of having the land in there. I understand there's some things that need to be done to be able to facilitate that happening. So I think overall, it's a good bill. A couple of questions. You know, right now it says residential structure. And I'm kind of in a quandary, and I apologize for thinking of this morning, so I should have reached out to the sponsor with this question. But as an example, I have a house that has a 3-car attached garage. Since it's attached, I would assume that value would be encapsulated into the residential dwelling. And so I would get that, my taxes reduced by having that garage attached. And I'm just a little confused on this, that say I have a 3-car detached garage, you know, and all the other buildings that are associated with the residence, would those buildings count with the residential building? At this point, I don't know. I'm kind of leaning to, if they're not attached, since it says residential structure, that it would just be the house. So if I have a detached garage, I wouldn't get the tax break on that. So, Mr. Chairman,
I think there'll be somebody in this room can answer that. Good
that's why
question.
and
Yeah.
I apologize again
Appreciate
to
it.
the sponsor for not,
No,
sometimes I think of these questions a little late, but I guess
No,
I'm
that's
better
good.
now. But Mr. Chairman, I do understand your quandary. There's pluses and minuses of every bill that you're gonna be looking at. But with this bill, I think it's workable. It will provide assistance, maybe some changes will broaden that out and help even more. But with that, Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions, I would entertain and try to answer them.
okay, members, nothing here on the right, going down the left, no question. Locke, do you have a question? Everybody's good here, I think.
Well,
Okay, thank
Mr.
you for
Chairman.
being here. Okay, good, next, go ahead and introduce yourself, Mr. Winnie.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. You're struggling with a problem from history. When our Constitution was written, gold was $20 an ounce, and it stayed there for 45 years. Then it was $35 an ounce, and it stayed there for 36 years. And then in 1971, inflation became the coin of the realm. My first house mortgage was 12%. I thought that was a good deal then. We recently had a cost of living adjustment of 8%. And this is what families are struggling with, and you're struggling with language that was written different in a different time and place. You need to keep an eye to windward on a couple things. One, consider the situation where a family lives in a house and the value of the house or the assessed value of the house is ratcheting upward even though their taxes are not. And after, say, 30 years, the house is inherited by their children and the reset kicks in and the children can't afford it. I have talked to families out in that used to live in Teton County. They were old line families, quite angry that they had been pushed out of the county by taxes. The other thing I think you need to keep an eye to windward on is what is the Supreme Court going to do? You guys have talked about that briefly here. They can either A, literally interpret the Constitution, or B, whatever they want. I suggest to you, Mr. Chairman, that how you write the preamble or the purpose paragraph of this legislation is vastly important in getting this to go where you want it to go. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winnie. Any questions? I don't see it on this side. This side. Okay, thanks, sir. Appreciate your testimony, you being here today. Go ahead, if you want to talk, folks, just fill up these chairs, and then it helps get more people heard. We're doing pretty good. I mean, we're gonna get this one bill. Taking my time, particularly on this issue. We want to make sure we hear from everybody, but try not to be repetitive and try to keep it moving forward. Okay, good morning. Introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you may know, my name is Marty Hartzog. I'm chairman of the Board of Equalization this year, anyway. And I don't speak for or against the bill. I will tell you, and I don't want it to sound overly harsh, but this bill does build a massive non-uniformity into the entire structure of property taxes. I mean, you can see that. one of the, the three legs to the stool that the Board of Equalization must try to find through the constitutional mandate is fair market value, uniformity, and equality. And so most of all of the statistical analyses that we require from our assessors, it measures that across the board within discrete property groupings. So let me just give you an illustration. There's an LEA, which is a fancy word for a big group of properties that are similarly situated. And the assessors are trying to make sure that everybody's valuations basically fall within a range, a statistical range for all of those properties. Now, what you've done here is through an exemption, you're saying we are going to establish a baseline value, and it's going to go up no more than 5% year in and year out, regardless of what the market does. But if the market goes up, then you're capped at 5. If you sell the house, we're starting over with market value. If you change the structure of the house, we're starting over with fair market value. So let's talk about 50 homes that are all very similar in a subdivision in LEA. And across that board, the assessors currently will do what's called a sold to unsold ratio. The idea is we don't want assessors just valuing the sold properties because you have recent data at a higher rate than all the unsold. And we require that be no less than 5%. Well, that number is going to go right out the window, obviously, when you have values for folks that haven't changed their property or sold their property locked in, and then people that have sold their properties or have changed their properties are now at market value. So somebody might turn that on me and say, well, still, it's uniform. We're doing it that way to everybody. But when people come in, they oftentimes say, well, this guy down the street, I know what he's paying, I know what they're paying, and why am I paying this when they're paying that? And the answer now in front of the board would be because that's the way the tax system works. And there's non-uniformity that's literally now intrinsic to the system. And I think that it's not difficult to understand that the math is not going to be hard to show that. I mean, it's really quite evident. And so I would just caution you, that's the kind of thing that you might see people arguing and angry about. Their values are sometimes, obviously rolling this out could be 40 or 50% higher than somebody who had not changed their home or acquired their home recently. And so again, the winners and losers, I mentioned that, I mean that in the most generic terms. The winners and the losers are going to be, the winners are going to be those folks whose property values went up. They're in a hot market. They're in Teton County or they're in Cody. They're going to enjoy quite a tax exemption. And the folks that live in the more serene market are going to possibly get nothing or a very marginal tax break. And so across the board, you're not tying the tax benefit to anything like a more as we talked about, where it's a poverty-driven or a needs-driven exemption. You're saying those folks need it. You're saying the people that are going to get the exemption are the folks that have properties that are really changing in value. They're going to enjoy it. And the folks that don't, so across the state, across the county, however you want to look at it, that's the disparity in terms of tax benefit. And I just caution you because that's a pretty basic outcome from this bill.
No, we appreciate it. Okay, looking to my right, I see no questions. To my left. Okay, appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Okay, yes, sir. Go ahead and introduce yourself and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rich Bratton, and I'm just a citizen in Sheridan County. I've not done any of this testifying stuff before, so you'll have to maybe cut me a
You're
little
doing
slack
great,
here.
man. You're doing great. Did you say Bratton?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I got it spelled right too.
Yes, sir.
Some Bratton.
Ian.
Oh,
And-
it's
and
Ian.
no, I'm not related. No, I'm
It's
not
not
related to
the
that Bratton.
Bratton and Casper then?
No.
Okay, it must be the Illinois bunch.
I'm
Going way back.
going way back. No, Minnesota. My
Minnesota.
grandparents immigrated to Minnesota from Norway.
Hey.
Yes, sir.
Me and you are probably related. literally.
We'll have to look into it.
Bergs and Sampsons,
There you
yeah.
go.
Okay, welcome, Mr.
So,
Brandt.
I'm not, you know, I'm not here for or against the bill necessarily, but I just see some significant structural issues that you need to identify and deal with. I appreciate the bringer of the bill and his creativity in trying to find a way to do something about the property tax issue, right? And by doing it through an exemption approach to try to fit within the Constitution, I think it's creative. And so I appreciate that effort. My background, I'm an actuary. I'm a fellow Society of Actuaries. I'm also a financial analyst, the CFA charter. So numbers are my thing. I looked into this bill, and there's some problems that need to be addressed if this bill were to work. One was well, first of all, philosophically, I want to say, and other than that, I'll stay strictly on the bill. To describe this bill as relief would be inaccurate, right? It's not relief, as many of the people before me have testified. If you see an ad for a pain reliever, you buy it because you want it to relieve your pain. You want it to take away the pain. I don't know anybody who wants to buy a Tylenol product that limits your increase in pain to 5% a year.
Right, no, this is reform, there's
Right?
no doubt. This is not
So
relief.
this is not a relief bill.
Unless you're in
It's
a county that's
mitigation.
going, unless you're in Sheridan County.
That's where I'm at, but it does mitigate future pain, but it's not relief. So I would not characterize the bill in that way. One of the issues is, and I've done a lot of work in terms of reading statute, and was brought up earlier, is that this bill as written, the exemption is not designed to carry over from year to year. And I know that the good sponsor said that, you know, everybody knows what we mean, and we can interpret this bill, and we can make rules. You can't make rules that overrule statute, okay? So that's where you have to start. Context is statute. 3911-101A, Romanet 1 defines assessed value. Assessed value equals taxable value. Okay, well, what's that mean? 3911-101, Romanet 25, if I've got, or 17, I'm not good on my Roman numerals, says taxable value for real property, all right, is 9.5% of fair market value. So now we have to chase down what's fair market value. 3911-101A, Romanet 6 says fair market value is, and it gives a definition, it's a common sense definition, what two people would be willing to transact at, okay? So break that down. Statutorily, the assessed value is 9.5% of fair market value, okay? What this bill does is it compares the assessed value from the current year. And assessed value is a defined term. You can't rule make it, you can't change it by rule. It's a statutorily defined term. So it says, shall be any assessed value of the single value, blah, 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 in excess of the prior year assessed value. Well, we've defined in statute what assessed value is. It's 9.5% of the market value. Okay, so this bill works in year one perfectly. But then we go to year two, you look at 2025's assessed value, or whatever year you're in, you have to use the state statute definition. You compare it to the prior year's definition of assessed value, and then that's what you're gonna apply the exemption to. So you've lost, right, the first year's exemption. You can't rule make it, and you can't wave your hand and say everybody knows what we mean, okay? You have to define your terms in statute, and it has to be clear. Not only your intent, but legally it has to be clear. And right now, it doesn't do that. The exemption does not roll over the way that the bill is structured. That needs, if that's the intent of the legislator, of the body, you need to fix that. And you can't rule make it away.
And I think we had this discussion, the very first person that testified. Well, actually,
Right,
I think it was a
right.
question, and I think we're working on it. I think we got notes on that to double down.
You're
so
gonna need to fix
appreciate
it for
you.
sure, because it's not, you
We wanna
can't
make
settle
sure it's
for, we know what we mean. and we can make
Oh,
rules.
100%. That's what
Right.
we do, yeah.
So that's just one structural issue with it. The other big issue that I see with this is it leaves way too much to interpretation and rulemaking and puts way too much of a burden on the assessors. Even in earlier testimony, one of the folks said that it was up to the assessors, there was the burden of the assessors to determine who, those two exemptions, right? That it was the burden of the assessors to do that. Let me see if I can find it here in my notes as I was reading. The burden is on the assessor to determine if the two exceptions apply. Okay, and that was from Director of DOR Henson. So those two exemptions are or two exceptions to this exemption. If the owner acquired property prior from somebody else, or if it's attributable to structural changes, including new construction, existing structure. The problem there is you've got however 23 county assessors and you've got structural changes. What does that mean? You know, adding on a room, doubling my house. I know in Florida there were laws in place that people would tear down their house, but they'd leave one remaining wall and then rebuild an entire new house. And they got around property tax issues because it wasn't under the statute qualified as a new residence. So the fact that structural changes isn't defined is a problem. Okay, so you've got to define your terms. And then there are way too many interpretations and assessments left to the assessors. It's going to be a problem. So if the legislature wants to move this bill forward in statute, you need to make it really clear what you're doing. You need to define the terms. You need to put it in statute because the assessors have a hard job. And they need to be given guidance, not all of them getting together in a room. And then you got somebody in Sheridan County complaining because somebody else in this county, oh, well, they got a better deal than I did on mine and blah, blah, blah. You know, that's not what the position you want to put those guys in, right? So too much rulemaking, too broad of terms, too much left on judgment of the assessors who do a really great job. I like my assessor, Sheridan County. I went in years ago, looked at my property tax. They were really good at explaining it. I've got a really great handle on it, and I appreciate those guys and the work they do. The other issue I have is the queries, abstract codes and queries. Programming is programming. Doing two queries instead of one with respect to the land. It's a matter of programming. I'm calling my engineering background. I fail to see the challenge of doing two queries and putting two numbers together and multiplying them times a percentage as opposed to just doing one. If the abstract numbers exist, use them. And granted, I'm not an assessor, so maybe I'm missing something. I'm sure I'll get an earful about that, but from a programming perspective, it doesn't seem too hard. The final thing, on interpretation is this other exception, transferring the property. I've seen some other bills that have a lot of pretty explicit provisions in them for family limited partnerships, LLCs, trusts, right? And there are a lot of ag communities here and a lot of ag families, and you structure your property under these different structures for tax purposes, right? None of that's mentioned in here. Just even the simple question of what happens when you pass to your spouse, what happens if you pass to your kids, what happens if you get divorced, what happens if you get divorced and you remarry, all of those things right now, the way this is written, are left to interpretation by the assessors, and we're going to get 23 different opinions in 23 different counties. So again, that's another example of where I think this bill really needs tightening up in order to accomplish its goal. I think that's about all I have to say.
Okay, very good. Any to my right, questions for Mr. Bratton? Appreciate you driving down from Sheridan County. You live where at? Bighorn, Tongue River?
I'm out Big Goose. I'm out 10 miles west of town at Big Goose Valley.
Oh, nice, very nice. Representative Bear has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bratton, thank you for being here today. You bring up a great point. I think I was trying to address that earlier. I too ran into this 9.5% calculation. If you're going to move it from the word assessed to the word taxable, we're now dealing with a term that is defined as 9.5% times the assessed value. So I believe we need to come up with a new term and put that into definitions. I think that's what you were getting at. Is that an accurate statement?
Mr. Bratton?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, Representative Bear. Whether you used taxable or assessed or fair market, they all trigger off of each other. So you're talking the same thing, right? And so you're constrained by those definitions. If you come up with a new term, challenge with that is, you know what happens when you change statutes, it blows through a bazillion different places in statutes where you'd have to go in and do that, right? So that's kind of problematic. That's where the good sponsors approach to try to attack this from an exemption standpoint instead of, from this standpoint is a creative idea. The exemption would need to roll forward. If I were to fix the bill, it would be to make the exemption roll forward, right? And now that is going to create additional programming for the assessors because now they have a new, truly do have a new number that they have to track. But unless you roll the exemption forward, you lose the punch of this bill after year one.
And that is, when we work the bill, we're gonna make sure of that. And we heard that at the very first, and now we've heard it at the very last, and we're gonna make sure that we get that 100% right. Because it gets out there and we want them 100%. So really appreciate you bringing that. That's exactly right. Any other questions? You wrap it up, Representative Bear, and then we'll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is a follow-up. And Mr. Bratton, since just prior to you, we heard it witness from a couple of organizations that, well, at least one of them really covers tax receivers. You're a taxpayer, so I want to get your take on some of the comments that we just heard earlier. And by my calculation, the next 5 years with this bill in place as law, as compared to the previous 5 years, this bill would increase revenues to those taxing entities by 92% over the previous 5 years, 92%. Do you think that's sufficient, or should those entities be concerned about some sort of, insurance that they get a continued stream of revenue?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and Representative Bear, I'm sorry, I was trying to do a quick calculation. I'll be honest with you, I kind of flitted away on it. Can you ask me the question again?
Yeah, go ahead, repeat that, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you very much.
No,
Mr.
I saw you
Chairman.
working it, and I thought, okay, I could see it.
So just in simple terms, the next 5 years, should this bill pass, compared to the previous 5 years, this bill would have an increase to the taxing entities of 92% over the previous 5 years. That's because as you mentioned earlier, we're not doing a relief here. We're doing a reform, as the good chairman mentioned, a reform which restricts the increase. So we are increasing every year. So by the end of 5 years, we're going to have received 92% more funds into those taxable entities than we received in the previous 5 years.
I'm not sure about that math. I see a lot of math guys out in the audience shaking their head, no way.
Well,
But we can have folks come up and maybe answer your question, Representative Bear. So if you don't want to,
no, that's okay. I'll opine on it because actually I've had other people kind of ask me the similar way. And it's a different way of looking at it, all right? And at first
we
I
want
had,
to look at it the right way.
well, I'm not saying it's a wrong way.
Yeah.
I'm just saying and it's good to look at every problem from every perspective.
Yeah, I hear
right?
you.
And so the idea there is an accumulation of the tax increase, I think, is what this is getting at. There's an accumulated tax increase. It's not just a 1 year spot pricing kind of a thing. Sorry to use investment terms, but it's an accumulation viewpoint of what has happened cumulatively. And in that sense, it's not an invalid argument to say that at all. So again, if you say people were shaking their heads, I understand what you're saying, because I did at first too, until I sat down with somebody with that argument, and then I began to understand what they're saying, and that's what they're talking about. So in that sense, it's true. I mean, when you think about the cumulative damage that's being done to the taxpayer, that's real. And then one more comment I'll say with respect to I know I've done the analysis with Sheridan County. Property taxes in Sheridan County in the last 5 years have almost doubled, 4.7 in the current fiscal year. They're budgeted for 8.4. But other revenue for the county of Sheridan, this is Sheridan specific, has gone from 11 million to a budgeted 16 million. So that's up another 50% in and of itself. So one thing to consider when you're considering relief bills is keep in mind, this is only a portion. I know it's all local. I know it all goes to counties, municipalities, special districts, and schools, right? So I understand that. But realize that it's, like in Sheridan County, it's 30% of the county budget. For the city of Sheridan, it's 12% of their budget. So it's not their entire budget. For the 28 special districts that we have in Sheridan County, 17 of them don't use property taxes at all. Okay, now some of them do. So you have to dive into the numbers a little bit to get a true understanding of this. So when I see property tax relief and people saying, oh my gosh, this is gonna kill us, you've got other sources of revenue that are increasing. And so there's room to get relief, but that's another topic.
Well, I did, again, really appreciate you. How long have you been now in Sheridan? Have you born and raised there, or are you?
No, sir, 2017.
Oh, so you moved here, okay,
Yes,
well,
yeah, we
welcome.
got- And one more comment on my property. On my property tax bill, I have 82 acres and I have various layers of ag that are all broken out on my property tax bill. I have a residential land that's broken out on my property tax bill, and then I have improvements that's broken out on my property tax bill. So those breakouts, at least in my case, they already exist, so. I
No,
don't-
they do, and that's
so-
why this fits. Well, we really appreciate you coming down and welcome and appreciate your testimony.
right,
So,
thank you.
Nice. Okay, any other members here would like to testify on this bill? Any folks in the audience, anybody? Okay, do we have anybody on the Zoom? How many do we have on the Zoom?
Just
Just
one.
one? Okay. Appreciate everybody being here. We're just gonna keep working. We're gonna be the hardest working committee in America. We're just gonna keep working. We're gonna get it all done.
Her name is Laura Pearson from Kemmerer, Wyoming.
Laura Pearson from Kimmer, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, but we can't see you.
Oh, hang on a minute.
You can probably turn that volume down just a scotch, I would say.
There, can you see me now?
Yeah, where are you at? You look like you got some sheep in the background.
Oh, that's just a picture that's in the background for any Zoom meetings because we have a sheep ranch.
Nice.
Okay, hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Laura Tolliver Pearson. I'm a 6th-generation sheep rancher in Southwest Wyoming and also a school bus driver. On HB 45, I would encourage a no vote unless it's amended. I would like to see improvements added to this bill, as if improvements are not added, our constituents are not going to improve their land. I would like to see a change to spouse or family members accepted. If the primary property owner passes away. I would like to see the property added. I would also like to see us go back to the 2019 rates, or how about acquisition value as a starting point? I like personally HB 0127 more. The reason for all these property tax bills is because people can't afford their taxes at the current rate. Last year's rate was expensive too. Our citizens don't understand how or why their property is assessed based on the amount their neighbor paid for their property, and they can't afford it. We the people never own our property, never. Wyoming needs to find a way to function without taxing our constituents out of their homes. Thank you for taking my testimony.
Ms. Pearson, thank you for joining us. How was you got snow on the roads over there? Or is it all clear?
Oh, not much. Nothing like last year.
Yeah, no doubt. So you
I
got-
just hope that we get our storms this month before we start lambing next month.
Right. All right. Well, we appreciate you and getting the children to and from school every day. Appreciate you doing that. And,
All right, well, thank
well, hang
you
on.
so much.
We might have some questions, so hang on. Appreciate you sticking with us all this time and joining us. Are there any questions by members? And all those things you mentioned, those are all notes that I have for potential amendments. I know the rest of the members of the committee do too. So others have brought some of those ideas forward as well. So we appreciate you bringing that. Members, any questions for Ms. Pearson? And Kimmer, you said?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good friend of mine, Don Julian, was a sheep rancher. He's up in Sheridan.
Yes. Yes.
Julian family. Okay. Well, very good. I don't see any questions, but we appreciate your input and joining us this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there no one else is on the Zoom? Anybody here would like to testify? Okay, we're going to close public comment on this. I'd like to have the sponsors come back up to the table. Here's our plan on this. We're going to start working this bill. And let's just think about the rest of our day here real quick. We've got, we're going to come back in a few minutes on adjournment or on recess, noon recess, let's say 12:15. And I'd like to, at that point, start on 127 and at least get that kind of heard. Now, we have a couple members that are on the travel rec committee and they're going to meet at 1. But I think 45 minutes to present the bill, get committee questions, get started on it. And then we'll carry that bill, 127, 133, 134, and then over to on adjournment. And then maybe we can have some action on all these as far as votes and move the packages forward that we think are going to work together. Not all these bills, as I read them, are going to work together. We don't want to pass conflicting things forward. And that'll be the majority of the committee, the rule of the committee, whatever we pass forward. So that's kind of our plan here for the next few hours. So if we can kind of start the work on this, maybe start getting close to it. So
Excuse me, Chairman.
with,
Clarissa mentioned to me that we would be in room 110
oh, yeah.
at noon and in the adjournment meeting.
Ms.
So we
Jeffrey?
wouldn't be back here, I don't think.
Ms. Jeffrey, perfect. And so we'll be in 110 for our noon and adjournment meetings, and that is on the first floor, down underneath the Senate chamber. Does everybody know where that's at? 110 is where we will be at about 12:15 and then on adjournment. And then be ready for an early meeting tomorrow morning too, before all the action starts on Friday morning, and maybe a lunch meeting, probably not a Friday on adjournment meeting.
What day is today?
Today's Thursday all day long. So, yeah, and so that just, so you folks who are gonna be following the committee, so we're gonna be at 110. Ms. Jeffrey, thank you so much for that kind reminder. I do have that in this yellow folder that you've provided me. Thank you so much. Okay, very good. Okay, members, we have before us now, we've closed public comment. What's your pleasure with House Bill 45?
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Bill's been moved by Representative Zwanitzer, seconded by Representative Byron. Okay, and I've asked Representative Craigo here for any questions, and Director Henson, if we have questions as well, you're available as well. So members, as we work through, and I'll just say this, some of these amendments that we're talking about might take a little more time, and so we can talk about concepts. We're not gonna take a final vote on the bill, and maybe we come back and we got these in a more, in the exact form that we want throughout the day. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. Okay, so the bill's been moved and seconded. Let's start working down the bill. Really nothing to amend. I don't see any amendments to the bill title. So let's flip over to page 1 and let's just start working down page 1. I think the first thing I think on page 2, in my mind, what I wrote notes, and I know you all have this, is this whole idea, is this a 1-year exemption? Is it gonna build, is the exemption gonna stack on the exemption from the first year and the third year and the fourth year? Is it going to the assessed value every year and then applied 5? So you wanna talk about that again a little bit more? I think we all understand the issue. There's 2 ways of looking at this math problem, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this might be a good question for our good director as well I mean, she's the expert on this, has much more experience than all of us put together. But what I would say is there is a difference between market value, taxable value, assessed value, and that's what we have to remember, is that taxable value and assessed value mean the same thing. They do not mean the same as market value. And so I think from a concept point of view, you have to remember that these properties are gonna continue to be valued at whatever their market value is. But then when the assessment is applied to that, the 9.5%, and then we get a value over there, we're saying the exemption applies to that number, not the underlying market value, because that would require a huge change in our taxing software. We're not doing that. And I think the director probably can add on to that, but if she has proposed language that would make it clear, I'm not sure how to make it clear. I'm obviously open for that
So,
suggestion.
let me try to say this like in a 6th grade level so I can understand it. So this is the way I understand this. So $100,000 house. Next year it's 150,000. Well, this exemption then kicks in on the assessed value. You would only be assessed on 5,000 of that improvement. Is that right? Of that increased market value. And then it goes to 200,000 the next year. Now, I think this is a question, what is it on the 150 or is it on the 105? Okay, that's how is that? Okay, I think this is what we're all thinking. Okay, go
Thank you,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and I am really appreciative of the discussion on assessed value. As we've heard previously, absolutely, our statute, even though you have to follow it through, we have definitions defined by definitions, defined by definitions. I have one possible suggestion. On page 2, line 18, right after assessed value. So basically, we're saying any value that's in excess of prior year assessed value, insert less any exemption granted by 3911-105A, basically this statute, plus 5%. So we're very specific in our intent that says we're looking at prior year value less any exemption that was granted by this statute, plus 5%.
Okay, Representative Zwanitzer has a question.
Making sure it shouldn't say up to 5%, because we'll have years where property might go down. I just want to make sure that's
Right.
clear, that that language still works, that it's up to 5%. Okay.
It's a maximum, not.
Mr.
it's-
Chairman, I believe the language does that. It basically makes it, you go to the prior year, you take the assessed value, which is fair market value by the level of assessment to get assessed value, less any exemption that was granted by this statute, plus 5%. And prior to that, we've said anything above that is what we're exempting. I think that math works.
Okay. Okay, so I think we've got notes on that. Does anybody want to repeat that? I put after assessed value, comma, less any exception granted 3911-105A plus 5%. Now, this won't be our last crack at this.
Mr. Chairman, and I would go ahead and put the A, I apologize, so we've got XL, triple I,
Yeah, right, yeah,
and A. Just,
43, isn't it?
again, we've got an entire section in Title 39 that talks about exemptions. We don't want anybody understanding that we're going to look at all of those exemptions in this calculation. We just want to make sure that any exemption that was granted by this is included as our starting point when we add 5%, determine if that new value exceeds that or not, and if any exemption is applicable for the
Is
following.
the L 50? I think it's 50, isn't it? So the X shows 43, I think. Is that right? Okay. Okay. Okay, I wrote that in there as well. Okay, so that's a thought there. Okay, does anybody want to move that amendment? We're still saying in concept. We'll have our attorneys make sure it's written exactly right. Does anybody, it's moved by Vice Chair Oakley. Is there a second? Second by Representative Bear. I think we've all discussed this. Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's been adopted. Are there any other amendments to A? Okay, how about B? Okay, now we're getting over to, and let's just talk about this first, you know, deal where the exemption is not applicable. Okay, let's talk about the structural changes. We had quite a bit of questions from members of the audience. I know we have that defined in rule, I believe, and I think we know, let's talk about that. And there was questions about garages and attached and detached and all those things. Who wants to take that?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, so we've seen language in prior proposed legislation that talked about substantial changes. And then we believe that that really did open the door for a lot of subjective decisions. So we thought about this word structural change, including new construction or additions. So the attempt was to, basically I've changed the footprint of that residential structure and single-family residential structure is defined. So from the assessor perspective, if I've added an addition or if I've built a new house that's a habitable structure, those would be the triggers. We've asked the assessors if they believe that that needs clarification in rules. Obviously, that rulemaking process allows everybody to give input if we think it needs more. But just in the simplest terms, did the footprint of that residential structure change? Or was it new construction in the first place
Okay.
for that residential
So let me
structure?
ask you this, to build a nice pole barn out back, doesn't affect this then? That's an
Mr.
outbuilding.
Chairman, this particular bill only looks at habitable residential structures. This legislation as written does not have anything to do with buildings that are not a residential habitable structure. So that takes us to the detached garage. So if it's an attached garage, that is part of that structure and you're living in that structure. But if you've got outbuildings, whether it's a pole barn, we all know some people call it the garage, some people call it the shed, some people call it, in this legislation, it's very clear that it's only that residential habitable structure. And so this, as it's written, has nothing to do. If I have outbuildings, a riding arena, a commercial repair shop,
And I build onto that, doesn't affect it.
none of that is
Yeah.
impacted by this legislation.
Okay. Is everybody pretty good with that? Let's move on to the owner acquired the property during the prior calendar year. I think that was, I understood that as if they buy it on January 2nd, they get the benefit of it, basically.
So, Mr. Chairman,
It's not gonna go till the next January 1st.
Mr. Chairman, so these two pieces, always keep in mind, it's just for that 1 year. The next year, they would be eligible again
Yeah.
for this exemption.
That's right, yeah.
Related to ownership, I asked the committee for your guidance. Our thought was, as long as one person still has ownership of that property, and they had it the year before, we look at that as it's under the same ownership, and they would be eligible for the
Yeah.
exemption. If there's no connection between who's on the deed in 2023 to who's on that deed in 2024, then they're not eligible for this exemption.
And I think that's clear then. Okay, and then we had this question about surviving spouse. So Representative Swanitzer.
Well, more so, I put my home in a trust. or I
Yeah,
put my kids
that's
on
right.
my house, I mean, not that it would ever happen, but you could perpetually do that for 4 generations and keep that 5%
That's what I
indefinitely
hear in
then? If you want.
California, nobody ever dies.
So,
Just keeps
Mr.
on
Chairman,
rolling.
you're right. When you put a property under a trust, the trustees of that trust can change, but it's under the Zwanitzer Trust. If it doesn't change from the Zwanitzer Trust to the next year, it's still under the Zwanitzer Trust. We don't know what happened here. They would still be eligible for this. The assessor's not gonna start researching if the trustees changed.
Thanks.
Okay, so, question, Representative Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's go back to the ranch hand. Let's say that my corporation has 5 ranch hand houses out there. Are those all underneath one ownership, or how do you view that?
Good question, okay?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Northrop, we have the deed. That's who owns that property. So if I own the entire ranch and I have ranch hands that are living in those properties, I still own that property. And it hasn't changed from one year to the next. This bill, as written, would apply the 5% to each one of those structures.
Be no different if you own 10 rental houses in Casper.
If
Really?
I own 10 separate rental houses, this bill doesn't care who lives in those homes. They're single-family residential structures, and if that ownership did not change, they would still be eligible for this process.
But if you add a 6th ranch hand house, or you double the size of the 5th one, then you're off, that parcel's off.
Mr. Chairman,
piece is
if you deed one of those houses to the
Yeah.
ranch hand, for 1 year, they're not gonna qualify for this exemption, if the exemption's applicable. That's the other thing to remember about. This does not mean that every property is going to receive an exemption. It's only those structures that exceed 5% of the prior year assessed value, less than the exemption granted, plus 5%.
Yeah.
I believe that we're gonna see a lot of properties where
Okay, are there any amendments on 2? That on line 6 is where I'm at, or 9 on paragraph C. Representative Zwanitzer.
I guess it's more of a question on a concept, Mr. Chairman. As we heard from the good sponsor, this is only gonna be for residential, and then in future years, we could expand it. Is there any good or bad reason why not to do that in this bill with an effective date to do so next year? Otherwise, we'll have another bill next year and can look at it anyway, but is there any problem with doing it, saying this is the immediate need, and then we will, by 2025 tax year, expand it?
For, you talking land?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that would be under D, I think would be another paragraph is how I see that. I don't know, what do you think?
We don't have to do that today, but if there is a way to do that.
I think we amend that in there. I have that as an amendment. Go ahead and sponsor the bill. You're working a bill with us, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually think you're gonna have to start over with a different lead-in paragraph. So instead of XLIII, you're gonna have another one that's 4 there.
Okay.
And that one would be for the land portion of it, because they're 2 separate things anyways. I mean, I think we had lots of good questions about that. And then that particular paragraph would have an effective date of 2025. You wouldn't really change the structure of the bill as written right now. You just add a whole nother paragraph below that with all the same type of language and say that
So
effective date.
paragraph-
That's how I think it would be the
paragraph
cleanest
4.
way.
You bet. And a new section, number 44 with paragraph A. Okay, so I wrote it as paragraph E. I agree with you. I think you're right on that. Okay, we'll get to that. Any amendments on 2 up there on line 6 and 7? How about C on 9 and 10? Okay, so we're not gonna worry about surviving spouse or trustees yet. Okay, we can keep thinking about it. We'll keep working this. We're not gonna be done here in the next 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Crago, Representative Crago.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not opposed to, if we want to clarify what that means. I mean, we can come up with some language between now and our your next meeting regarding that. I know there's several bills out there with that language
Already
already
have it.
drafted. I think we could talk to our good lawyers and have it pretty
Okay,
quick.
so let's work on that, make sure that's clear on surviving spouse particularly, I think. And I think this trust ownership transfer thing, I think we gotta look at too. I don't think it should go on for 100 years, you know, the same. Anyway, I think that's something to think about. I don't know. Okay, we're good on paragraph C. How about D? Okay, now after D, we just talked about maybe a new section 44, Roman numeral 44, which would then include the land, a paragraph A, which would include that residential associated improved land, I think is the word we use in all these bills. But we'll get our legal folks on that. Is that, I'm just going by my notes. I'm not making a motion. Now, the chairman can make motions, but I try not to. Okay, I'm just throwing it out there.
That idea probably interim bill, is that? I think what I heard, Mr.
For
Chairman, is it
2025.
might be better as an interim, and we may need to redo the entire, and we'll have time in the interim to pass that and get it ready for 2025 tax year if this bill passes.
I don't know. I'd like to knock it out, but that's my opinion. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think the key is that we're trying to do very broad brush language on very different properties that exist in the state of Wyoming. So for example, this legislation covers mobile homes. I don't own the land. If I own the mobile home, it may be in a trailer park, and this exemption really allows them to take advantage of this as well. We're not, I don't believe, thinking of providing the associated land to that mobile home with the tax relief. So there really are some other things that
Yeah,
we
no.
need to consider when we start looking at including the land. So I like the idea of breaking it up separately. I will say that, given some time, if you wanted to limit so that you're not getting the 2,000 acre parcel and the 6,000 square foot parcel and utilizing that, if we had some time, I believe assessors could work on their data and identify and.
2025.
Right.
Right, but I mean, not time to change this bill. I think that's an easy change in the bill, but give you 2025. That's the time you're talking about.
Right, or if you want to address the land, perhaps a separate bill. I know.
Okay, I'm getting beat up on this one.
Land is just
Okay.
challenging.
We'll keep working it. I hear you. I hear you. Okay, and then we're not gonna be done with this bill, obviously. The last thing, I think, for homework, we're on homework assignments now, the surviving spouse, to think about this land piece on a 44. And then what I put on the back was to also have it on the tax bill, not just the assessment schedule. And so, sponsor of the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's gonna end up in 3913-107. B, little b, big C, and I think it's fairly easy to add. We just have to add a sentence to that paragraph.
if we
Because
can-
there's actually language in there regarding tax relief program, and so we would just add another sentence referring.
So I would say to the sponsor, if you can, I'm gonna give you all three of those homework assignments: surviving spouse, that issue, the trust, overall, the Roman 44 on the land, and we can debate that some more, and then this, having that show on the exemption, property taxes avoided on the tax bill as well. So we can have those three things for homework assignment before we get together. Now, let's just talk about and I'll throw this out to you guys. Do we want to finish this thing at our noon meeting, or do we want to start on your bill 127? What do you guys, I mean, we want to try to finish this in 45 minutes at noon, this bill? Or do we want to start on your 127 and finish this on adjournment? Thoughts? Just speak up. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
My thoughts are, we finished this bill. We're there. I think we're there. We just need to.
Okay, Representative Bear, got your hand.
I think that when we look at 127, we're gonna have a lot of other ideas that may affect this bill. This may be the one we end up working through. So I'd rather see 127 and get some other ideas.
I'm kind of with you too a little bit on that. Go ahead.
Two things, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to kind of do the overall of a variety of bills before we make
I
a
agree.
decision on any.
I mean,
And I have one other amendment I'd like to
Oh,
at
yeah,
least
more homework.
give the sponsor of the bill a little more homework, which is to say that if we are going to put provisions in for 2025, I would like to include a provision, at least potential amendment for the committee to consider, that it only applies to primary owner-occupied homes.
Okay, so here's what, we're gonna stick with our original plan. We've got some homework for the rest of the day. We're gonna go to 127 at 12:15 and start hearing these, because the same folks who are here, listen to this bill, have interest in that bill as well. And we're gonna wanna know your thoughts now that these are, and we're just gonna keep working down the list. 127, 133, the tax deferral, I got it on the list. Probably won't stay till 10 tonight. But but I think we've exhausted a lot of public comment that is gonna carry over to all these bills, frankly. And I really appreciate their public comment, folks being here. Okay, so this meeting is recessed then until approximately 12:15. I think it's room 110. 110 on the first floor underneath the Senate. So thank you all for being here. We are in recess.